and of Arvind through professional interactions, as we heard yesterday. And he's speaking on competitive federalism and the ease of doing business in India, a topic that Arvind, I'm sure, has also written about.
No. Anyone in charge? Now it's on. I think there's some magician here who sort of can cycle the... And I don't think that this works with PDFs. Oh, it does work. Oh, brilliant. Okay. So then, but I may just still stand here just to make life simpler. So let me thank Arvind Bhai for inviting me, Praveen for organizing this wonderful weekend, this festival really of economics and public policy and India-related work, and May and Michael and all the folks at the center here at SIPA for really putting on a wonderful event. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to be here. And when we were sort of chatting back and forth about what might be the best topic to present, we naturally thought, and we very quickly realized that, in fact, the ease of doing business, and that's come up several times already. I don't think I can match Amitabh's high-octane performance, and I see he's not on his device now anymore, which he was during the previous session. But I did notice that. Turnabout is fair play, Amitabh. Is the ease of doing business, because one of I think, and obviously I'm a little biased here, one of the big projects that NITI did in the last couple of years was a large survey of states, a granular survey speaking to enterprises. I'm going to talk about that at some length, but in the interest of time, let me just plunge into it, and just to keep myself honest as well, I'm putting myself on a stopwatch. So why does the ease of doing business matter for job creation? I think at this point I would just be belaboring arguments you've heard delivered with a great deal of gusto and far more rhetorical flourish than I'm capable of from the lunchtime speaker, Amitabh. And what I'll talk about, therefore, is why does it matter? How does one measure the ease of doing business? And then jump into the IDFC Institute enterprise survey, which we did in partnership with NITI. It's actually, I think, in itself a very unique sort of model of cooperation where we provided our intellectual capital pro bono to the government, to NITI, and but the survey and the report belongs to them, belongs to the people of India, and the data will soon be available in the public domain for scrutiny, for replication, for scholarly work, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Now, again, I think I don't need to spend too much time on this because we've heard about this already, but why the ease of doing business? And we know that India, to succeed, to grow rapidly, as we've heard from several speakers, is going to have to create jobs, is going to have to create good manufacturing sector jobs. And we often hear this famous statistic that 1 million new workers enter the workforce, potential workers enter the workforce every month. And it may be a little less, it may be a little more, but that's a lot of people that need to be absorbed into the labor market. As we've also heard during the course of the day, small and medium-sized enterprises are disproportionately important in India, and this is certainly going to be a problem. This has been a problem for us, and it remains a problem. We also want to emphasize the importance of startups. The topic of startups, in fact, came up as well, because worldwide, I mean, even in this country, startups account for a large percentage of gross job creation, and providing a fillip to manufacturing in order to encourage firm entry and the growth of existing firms is very important. Now, someone you know very well produced this this chart. And in fact, if you've got questions about it, Rana is somewhere here in the room. So I will just wave my hand and say that we know this data has to be correct. That shows how disproportionately large, how skewed Indian manufacturing employment is to micro and small firms. And we saw the data earlier today. In fact, the reality is most so-called micro enterprises is just a 1 or 2 person operation. They really are essentially self-employment. And look where we stack up, not just compared to China, but to other Asian economies. Our firms are too small, and therefore they're unproductive as compared to where they should be. Now, we've also heard about this, that labor regulations or burdensome regulation in general, over-regulation, red tape, bureaucracy, hinders the growth of manufacturing. It hinders employment creation, job creation. It also leads to informalization. We heard about contract workers earlier today as one facet of that story. So I think we can take it as read in this group at least, that removing some of the burdens on the ease of doing business is going to be a key ingredient, perhaps a critical ingredient, to pushing ahead India's growth story, and doing so in a way that's sustainable, creating sustainable, high-quality, good jobs that will sustain us in the 7, 8, 9, hopefully 10% range for the next 10, 20, 30 years, which is what we need to combat poverty and just lift ourselves up by the bootstraps. We're going to need to have rapid growth, and we cannot do it in an environment of burdensome regulation, which we still face. And now here is a picture that to me tells a very interesting tale. This is from the economist John Cochrane of the Hoover Institution, who does a very simple exercise, but it's a very striking one. We've already heard about the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business report, which is due out in a couple of days. This is the distance to frontier, rather than the ranking, which is a more meaningful statistic for us as economists, as against GDP per capita, or the log of GDP per capita, for all of the countries surveyed. And I think this is 2013 data. So this is a cross-section in the year 2013, I believe, of the World Bank's distance to frontier and GDP per capita, log of GDP. And you can clearly see that there's a positive correlation. Now, I'm not going to get fussed about the direction of causality, indeed, or get sucked into that conversation. I think, if I might say so, I think we often get exercised as academic economists about the question of causality. I'm quite agnostic and happy to be agnostic about what direction it flows in. Is it that more rapid GDP growth leads to a better regulatory environment? Is it that better regulations lead to more rapid growth? I would like to believe there's some virtuous feedback mechanisms that fuel both more rapid growth and a better, less burdensome regulatory environment, and without worrying so much about measuring causality in some rigorous sense that will satisfy the more puritanical among our professional colleagues. Now, we did the same thing for India. This is now a time series of the same concept, the same as Cochrane, except this is now all of the years for which we have comparable data for India, the log of GDP as against India's distance to frontier. And again, you see it's not perfect, but there clearly is a positive relationship, a positive correlation here. There is something to this notion that a better doing business environment correlates in some important way with higher GDP, higher activity. Okay, so how does one measure the ease of doing business? I am not going to spend too much time on the other surveys that have come out mostly for the interests of time. But the World Bank has done a whole lot of interesting and important work apart from the well-known the well-known Ease of Doing Business report that's due out in a couple of days. It's done a Doing Business in India survey. It has done its own enterprise surveys as recently as 2014. And these are very valuable and rich, interesting documents. And of course, Amitabh is here, and DIPP were the pioneers in doing a state-level ranking, and as he was saying, name and shame states that are underperforming, and of course create incentives for those states to get their act together and improve. So this is really the sort of post-2014 interest in the ease of doing business. The Modi government flagged this as a top priority, and so DIPP took the lead in this. And their measure or their index, in some sense, tallies up what the states have done, and this is culled from state government officials. So we felt that it would be useful to have something complementary to this, that actually talked to enterprises on the ground and compared and contrasted the actual lived on-the-ground experience of firms with what experts and government officials have to say, because there might be something different going on. So the NITI Aayog IDFC Enterprise Survey is the fruit of this work. I will just talk a bit about the methodology without getting too bogged down in details. There simply isn't time. But the good news is the report in all its glory is available both on the NITI website and the IDFC Institute website, and I would encourage you to take a look at it. We're really very proud of how it came out, and I think you'll also enjoy we took care over the presentation of charts and graphics. It's in fact quite appealing for a report on the ease of doing business. So we cover almost all the states and union territories, not quite all, but 32. We've got over 3,000 manufacturing firms that we survey. So there's a large sample of firms. We also, as a complement to speaking to the enterprises on the ground, spoke to a la World Bank, talked to chartered accountants, company secretaries, and the like, industry associations, and just to have sort of a reality check, a backup check on our survey. We covered all of the major areas of the ease of doing business. Again, this is not something that's unique to us. The World Bank also covers the same areas. But really everything, if you look at this list of 9 principal areas, everything from the birth to the death of a firm. And of course, both ends of that spectrum and everything in between are very important for productivity and for the health of the economy, right? It's as important that firms be allowed to die gracefully without sucking up too much capital and being a drain on resources, as it is to allow new firms to be born for this cycle of creative destruction, a la Schumpeter, to take place. So it covers everything from setting up a business, land acquisition, environmental compliance, infrastructure, labor, taxes, legal issues, access to finance, and then exit. So I think that really covers the bases. I won't say much about this, but we have a survey instrument, again intended to complement DIPP. So in some sense, the survey was designed to be similar to the questions that DIPP posed to government officials, but except modified by the fact that we're asking firms on the ground what their views are on process, on ease of process, on transactions costs, on the time taken for compliance across a range of different areas, and then a qualitative assessment of how each of these areas, how burdensome they found, whether there was a no obstacle, a minor obstacle, and so on, a moderate to severe obstacle, or did not apply to them. And I think we're going to just jump right into the key findings of the survey. I'm not going to spend time on the definitions. We can come back to it if there's interest in the Q&A. But let's jump into our first set of results. And these were ones that we found extremely interesting on the awareness of access to a single window system to finance legal disputes and so on. And here's our first bit of data for you. Now, this particular graphic, this particular chart looks at startups, starting a business. So the sample size here is rather small, so please do asterisk that, or as a caveat for this. But what is interesting, or what we found striking here, was that about 20% of all enterprises were aware of a single window when one in fact actually existed. So this points to the centrality for us of something as basic as information dissemination. Get the word out there, right? If you have a single window, at least make folks aware of it. And the notion that, and this is actually, this is probably about as low-hanging a fruit as one can pluck, right? Doesn't require legislation or regulatory, just requires a good, sustained effort and drive to disseminate information. Access to finance, again, a mixed bag, a mixed picture here. But of course, in India, which is a heavily bank-driven economy, this should not be that surprising. A mixture of retained earnings, bank borrowing, etc. Interestingly, only a little more than half of the firms reported taking a loan from a bank or other financial institution. So it shows, in some sense, how much work remains to be done in deepening the capital market in India, because for most particularly smaller enterprises, retained earnings and personal savings are still very important sources of finance. Legal disputes, 8% of firms had legal disputes. They went to civil court, 5% to tribunals, and they took on average approximately 2 years to resolve, which is actually in the Indian context is not that bad. That's not as bad as one may have feared, where you hear horror stories of things being tied up in court for 5, 6, 10, 20 years. But the average here was 2, which is still probably too high, but it's not bad. Now, I won't go through each and every one of these tables. Time doesn't permit it. But here you see, so I guess the other point I want to bring out is that there's a huge amount of variation across states. And one thing I forgot to tell you in my excitement to get to the main results was that this is really a 2-part report. We hope this is of a diptych. Part 1 is national trends, and that's what we launched at the end of August in Delhi. And part 2 then is a granular state-level analysis looking at all of the states, and essentially what we hope to be a manual for states as to how they might go about improving the doing business environment, so when they're being named and shamed, they'll know what to actually do once that's happened. But what's striking is that even the national trends shows us the huge amount of variation across states, across all of these areas. So this is a very basic measure of the average number of days taken for all of these different activities, and you can see from the average of starting a business to 118 to 50 in Himachal. Now that's a big difference. So again, without belaboring it, there's a huge amount of variation across states. And so national averages in some sense disguise or mask this variation. I'm going to actually skip ahead because my time is running out. Perceptions about changes in the overall regulatory environment. You can see that again, it's something of a mixed bag across all of these areas. Perhaps 30 to 40% of firms feel that things have improved. Many feel it's stayed the same. Relatively few feel that it's worsened. So that's a heartening thing to take away from this slide. That on the whole, if you add together improved and stayed the same, that's probably, that probably is the bulk of the firms in most of these categories. Now I'm going to actually skip ahead because my time is ticking down. So if you can speed read, you'll get all of sorts of good information here. If not, the report is going to be available for you online. I just want to skip to, so we essentially analyze, we slice and dice the data in a bunch of different ways, but one thing we thought would be fun is to compare high versus low growth states. Because again, this is another check on the intuition that somehow growth and doing business are interrelated or correlated. Is it true that high growth states tend to do better in a range of indicators, again, agnostic on the direction of causality, whatever that might be. And here we give you the division of the states, essentially above and below the median. There are a couple of ways we did it, filtered out outliers and a few other things. And the usual suspects are in the usual places here in the low and high growth states. But to cut to the chase, here is an example of the difference in time taken between high growth and low growth states. And I won't burden you with all of these. You can read them off the slide. But for the most part, as you would expect intuitively, high growth states do better in terms of taking fewer days and having a less of a compliance burden than lower growth states. And we can debate till the cows come home why this is going on. But the fact is certainly is noteworthy. I just want to now come to my conclusion because I'm on my own stopwatch. I've got about a minute and a half till time runs out. The basic message that we want to convey in terms of policy recommendations, policy implications is, in a sense, nothing that should shock or surprise you, which should be good news. We do need to improve the ease of doing business climate in India to give us more rapid growth, more durable employment generation, boost manufacturing. We have important information gaps that need to be filled. And this is, again, a very low-hanging piece of fruit waiting to be plucked before we go on with the more difficult job of actually reforming burdensome regulation. So, again, it's a very rich report. I would urge you to read it. And I thank you for your time and your patience.
Thanks. Do we have time for a couple of questions? Anna?
So Vivek, really enjoyed your presentation, and I think this is a really great survey that's been carried out. I was wondering whether you have a sense of the drivers behind these changes at the state level. Is it that it's basically states which are generally good across the board in, let's say, health or education delivery of that, which are also doing a good job on this whole licensing permit, et cetera? Or do you find in some cases that the chief minister is behind the drive, or some secretary of Department of Industry that's driving this?
Shall we collect one or two? But that's a very good question. Actually, who is the chair should perhaps moderate the Q&A? Oh,
Yeah.
Or whoever has the microphone. That's even simpler.
Yes. Wait. Are you going to
I'll respond briefly to Rana because I think I may forget the question before the next one comes up. So again, there wasn't time to go into it, but it's not always the case that the states who expect are the high performers do so across the board. In other words, there is interesting variation, and we do hope when Volume 2 sees the light of day, we hope it does, you'll see a lot of rich information on how states rank, stack up in all of these areas. But sure, as painting with a broad brush stroke, the states that you think are doing well in, that are high growth or high income levels generally fare well. Why do they fare well? I mean, I do think that cooperative competitive federalism, I think it's more than a cliche. It really is a mantra of the Prime Minister, who came to Delhi as a state chief minister, became prime minister, and I saw the other side of it. Saw how difficult and how hamstrung he himself says he was as chief minister. So I think this notion, and I think we should acknowledge that our, the great scholar we're honoring today, Arvind Bhai, pioneered the idea intellectually, the concept that you use this fact that the center can empower states to legislate on things like labor and land, so on, where it's concurrent. So use the fact that our Constitution is a very sophisticated document, and empower the states, and whether it's name and shame them, whether it's encourage them, whether it's electoral politics that will tame populism and bad economics. So I think it's a combination of those things. And of course, obviously, just heightened expectations and heightened, people are looking for some kind of results from state governments. And I think to be fair, they've all understood that for the most part. I mean, some have had a head start, others are now catching up. But I think this is, again, a case for me of sort of virtuous competition, not a race to the bottom.
Okay, next question.
Your slide mentioned that the survey data includes manufacturing companies. So was there a reason why only manufacturing companies were looked at?
That was what we had agreed we would look at, and we're hoping we'll do services and other sectors in future reports.
Mary?
Thanks. I think this is really interesting, and I've always thought that there's so much more that could be done with the ease of doing business numbers every year, and this is an example of one of them. I'm wondering, and it doesn't sound like your paper got at this, but I've wondered, did maybe you get some glimpses of, in certain states, whether there was one or two reforms that are the binding, ones, or higher priority? Is there any way that states can know, is it the furthest away they are from the...
Yeah, no, that's actually a good question. So we explicitly in this report decided not to have a ranking for a variety of reasons. So we therefore you can't use our report to name and shame, but our report certainly will tell you what's going on across these issue areas, particularly when Volume 2 appears. But I cannot tell you, for instance, based on national trends, what is it that put Gujarat ahead in one category or not in another. I hesitate to sort of go down the route of ascription to brilliant state chief ministers. I think there are structural factors at work as well. But I think the nature of sort of intense subnational competition, this notion of federalism, I think is real. And I do think that states recognize that it's going to become increasingly challenging to get a slice of the central government's budgetary pie without performing. Particularly if what comes down the pipeline is actually tying grants to outcomes. You have to start getting your act together at that point.
Thank you. I think we need to move to the next paper.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
It is a co-author paper by Praveen